Hello over there and welcome again to lesson 14 of the CSS playlist. In this particular lesson we are going to take a look at the concept of the CSS display property. The CSS display property is the property which allows you to control the layout of the page or the layout of the elements on the page. It specifies whether the element will have a block level display or it will have an inline level display. So the CSS display property has many values as follows. So we have four types of the CSS display values. The display can be inline, which displays an element as an inline. The display can be block, which displays an element as a block element. And the display can be flex, which displays an element as a block level but within the flex container. And then we have the grid display, which displays an element as a block level but within the grid container. So we are also going to look the difference between the flex container and the grid container. So without further ado, let's get started with a practical demo to see the four different types of the CSS display property. So with that said, I want to turn over to my Visual Studio Code, and the first thing we're going to look is how to see the inline elements. So the inline element it normally starts on a new line, but it does not take the whole width. So I'm going to my Visual Studio Code, and right below this table I'm going to add one example of the HTML inline element. An example of an inline element is the anchor tag. So I'm going to add one anchor tag here, and I'm going to call it link1. And then I'm just going to provide the href as for now hash. Then I'm going to add another anchor tag right below it. So let me copy this and add another one below it. Now I have two anchor links. One inside our code, these anchor tags have been written so that this one appears below the other. But when they are displayed on the browser, because they are inline elements, they are going to be displayed on the same line. So when you come and see in your code here, you can see that now they are displayed on the same line. Even if you add the third one right below here, all of these are going to display on the same line. So the more you add more, then it is going to display on the same line until this browser width is exhausted. Here is when we will have the next one beginning on the next line. So that's an example of inline display. Now we can change the default display of this inline element to a block level. So a block element is an element that displays on a new line and it takes up the whole browser width. So I'm going back to my code, and now let us add an example of a block level element. One good example of HTML block level element is the paragraph. So here I'm going to add one paragraph element, and I'm going to say this is the first paragraph, and then I add a line break, and then I say it is used to show the block level display. Okay, then another break line. So I want to have 3 lines in this paragraph. This is the first example. Now I have a paragraph, and now I'm going to save. I'm going to add the next paragraph right below it. So let me bring this one here. So this is my first paragraph, and then I'm going to copy this first paragraph and duplicate it here. Now I have 2 paragraphs, one after the other. Because a paragraph is a block level element, the first paragraph will be displayed, the second paragraph will be displayed below it but not on the same line. So now when you go to your browser, you're going to see now that this is the first paragraph displayed here. The second paragraph will not be displayed after this. It will be displayed below. Why? Is because they are block level elements. But now let's change the default type of the inline display element to a block. So I'm going to change the display from inline to block and also from block to inline. So I'm going here, and within my CSS I'm going to select the anchor tag, and I'm going to apply the display property, and I'm going to say block. Now the anchor tags will now be displayed in a block level element. The same thing, I can change the display of the paragraph from block to inline. So I'm going over here again, and I'm going to select the paragraph. So let me give these paragraphs a class name. I'm going to remove here, and I'm going to come back and select, give these two paragraphs a class name. So let me give it class paragraph 1, and also this one class paragraph 1. And now I'm going to select this class. So please make sure, if you have not looked at the CSS selectors, go back and look at that. So now when we come here, I'm going to select those class name. And how do we select a class? We use the dot and then the class name p1, and I'm going to say for that class, an element with that class, give it a display of inline. Okay, and now because it is an inline, you can see now the paragraph is displayed on the same level. So we have that class is displayed as the same on the same line, one after the other. Or even better, I can just say for all the paragraphs, give them an inline display. You should remove this dot right here and then save. Now we have the paragraphs displayed on the same line. Now the next type of the display is the next type of the display that we're going to look at is the flex container. So how can we display an element in a flex container? So I'm going to come here and add one div element, and I'm going to give it an ID of flex div. That's the ID name, and within this div I'm going to put 3 paragraphs. So let me copy these paragraphs. Now I have 3 paragraphs within this div, and now I'm going to style this div to display these paragraphs in a flex container. So I'm going to go back to my styles here, and I'm going to first of all say the paragraphs should have a margin of 10 pixels. And then now I'm going to select that ID called flex div, and I'm going to say for the flex div, the display property should be flex. And now I'm going to save. So now when you come back to your browser, you're going to see that now for the div element, the 3 paragraphs have been displayed on the same line in a form of a column. If you add more paragraphs within this container, more columns will be added. So I'm going to go within the div, and I'm still going to add 1 more paragraph, and even 2 more, and 3 more. Now within this div we have like 6 or 7 paragraphs. All these paragraphs will be displayed on the same within the same container, and you can see now there's some spaces within this paragraph. So this is the first paragraph, the second one, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth. If you continue to add more, then the container will also shrink and to accommodate the other elements. So you can see that. So this is an example of a flex. So the flex container will resize automatically as the number of elements within the container increases. The next concept we want to look at is the CSS grid display, this one right here. So the grid display is also another container, but the difference between the grid display and the flex display is that the flex display adjusts automatically, while for the grid display you can specify the number of columns that you need. So I'm going now, instead of using the flex display, instead of using flex display, I'm going to say display as grid, and then here I'm also going to give the number of columns that I should have. So I'm going over here, and now I'm going to give the number of columns and then give the number of rows to be automatic, and then also the gaps between the columns. So I'm going to say grid template columns, and I'm going to specify 1 FR, 1 FR, and 1 FR. With this, I'm saying that I'm going to have 3 columns. Then also I'm going to specify grid template rows, and I'm going to select the value auto, and then I'm going to say grid gap I'm going to say the gap should be maybe 5 pixels. And now when I save these changes and you come back here, you're going to see that now all this content has been divided into 3 columns. The first column here, the second column, and the third column. So that is an example of a grid display. The only difference between a grid display and the flex display is that for the flex display, the columns adjust automatically with the number of the elements within the container. For the grid display, you specify explicitly the number of row of columns that you should have, and allow the rows to be automatic, and then the column, we will only have the number of columns that you have specified here. So that's all about the CSS display property, the 4 values: inline display, the block display, the flex display, and the grid display. With that said, I want to end this content right here, and then see you in the next lesson, where we look at the concept of the CSS position property.